Alright guys, sorry for the late delay on videos. Wasn't able to get them done earlier today. So this is for March 26th, Thursday. We're still in period 1. We're looking at development of monarchical states today. This is PDF page 135, or like the packet page 135, I should say, not the PDF page. But we're going to use this to move forward after we talked about exploration yesterday. Keep in mind these packets are not covering all the key concepts. Please still go back and look at the key concepts. Watch crash course videos. They're covering all this stuff in much greater detail than I am. I'm just trying to do something to help y'all out, but please try to do more if you can. Okay, so we're going to look at development of monarchical states. So tools of state crafts, such as permanent embassies in foreign lands, were first developed in the city-states of Renaissance Italy. Large unified nation-states began to develop in northern Europe during the early modern period. These city-states ultimately came to dominate the Italian peninsula and contributed to the transitions away from the medieval notion of feudal kingship. Prior to the 16th century, the king was not an absolute ruler. Instead, he had to rule with the consent of his great vassals, like nobles and lords. In the age of the new monarchical state, it was deemed the monarchical power was God-given, and therefore its very nature was absolute. In the Middle Ages, parliamentary institutions developed throughout Europe as a means of placing limits on the kings. However, in the early modern period, that thought shifted. The 16th century French philosopher Jean Bodin wrote this new style of monarchy, and he is in the key concepts. It is the distinguishing mark of the sovereign that he cannot in any way be subject to the commands of another. For it is he who makes laws for the subject, abrogates laws already made, and amends absolute law. The French monarchy is the most important example of how this power shift came about. It was not an easy victory for the French monarchy, which had to deal with assorted aristocratic and religious conflicts that threatened to destroy the state. Eventually, under King Louis XIV, France created a centralized monarchy in which the power of the king was absolute. However, it came at a high price, as it helped pave the way for the late 18th century French Revolution. England served as a very different model. In England, the Stuart monarchs, who reigned for most of the 17th century, meaning 1600s, were interested in adopting French-style royal absolutism, but found that the English Parliament stood in their way. Eventually, England became embroiled in what one historian was labeled a century of revolution, which eventually resulted in the supremacy of Parliament over the monarchy. Okay, so be aware of these important characteristics of the new nation-states. Number 1, growing bureaucratization. Across Europe, salaried officials began to depend on the monarchy for their livelihood. In France, the monarchy established a new office of intendant, which employed individuals to collect taxes on behalf of the monarch. Jean-Baptiste Colbert helped make these in France. Corruption was still a part of the system, as it was the practice of buying and selling royal offices to satisfy the short-term financial needs of the monarch. England was the exception to this trend. In England, the older system of cooperation between the crown and its leading subjects continued. All right, number 2, existence of permanent mercenary army. In the late medieval, early modern periods, revolution and warfare came about. In the 14th century, Swiss mercenary infantrymen lined up in the phalanx of 6,000 men and used their pikes to kill aristocratic horsemen. But by the end of the century, gunpowder further eroded the dominance of the mounted knight and made feudal castles far easier to conquer. The rising costs of warfare, most particularly the need to provide a foreign army on an annual basis, played into the hands of a developing monarchical state, which alone could tap into the necessary resources. Again, England was the exception because it did not establish a permanent army until the end of the 17th century, when it was firmly under parliamentary control. Growing need to tax, number 3. This is an instance where 1 plus 2 equals 3. Countries like France basically face a vicious cycle. Monarchs were in the constant need of taxes to pay for their permanent armies, while it was the army that was the monarchy needed monarchy needed to ensure control over rebellious peasantry, who resented the high rate of taxation. Traditionally, medieval monarchs were supposed to live off their own incomes. Other than the early modern period, this was becoming impossible due to the price revolution and the increased costs of managing a centralized state. All right, Italy. Not every part of Europe followed this process of national consolidation under a centralizing monarch. The Italian peninsula remained divided throughout this period, thus it became an easy target for ambitious monarchs of centralized states like France and Spain. There's not really anything in here you need to know for key concepts, so I'm just going to skip over Italy. Let's go to the, that's weird, it doesn't have a label for, I'm skipping them. Oh, is page 37 missing, or is it backwards? Oh, it's backwards. I'm going to skip down Italy to the Medici. had just led the Florentine population in expelling the Medici rulers, and then had established a puritanical state. This complete religious and political transformation of the city marked the end of Florence's leading role in Renaissance scholarship and art. Eventually, by 1498, Ludovico il Moro recognized the folly of what he had wrought and joined an anti-French-Italian alliance. Just go down to the last paragraph. The damage to the independence of the Italian city-states had also been done. Throughout the 16th century, Italy became the battlefield in which Spain and France fought for dominance. The collapse of Italian independence was a historical context in which Niccolo Machiavelli wrote what is generally seen as the first work of modern political thought, The Prince. Machiavelli had happily served his beloved Florentine Republic as a diplomat and official in chancellery. When the Republic was overthrown by the Medicis, Machiavelli was forced into exile to his country estate. The Prince is a resume of sorts in which Machiavelli tried to convince the Medici to partake in his services. Although some scholars have debated whether he was serious about his ideas, it does appear that Machiavelli was generally horrified by the increasing foreign domination of the Italian peninsula and believed that only a strong leader using potentially ruthless means could unify Italy and expel foreigners. Okay. England with the Tudors. So this is like Henry VIII. England had achieved a measure of unity under a centralized monarchy in the medieval period, but well before its continental counterparts. The 15th century War of the Roses was not aristocratic attempts to break the power of the monarchy, but rather a series of civil wars to determine which aristocratic faction, York or Lancaster, would dominate the monarchy. In the end, it was the junior member of the Lancastrian family, the Tudors, Henry Tudor, who became Henry VII, who won central authority in England when he established the Tudor dynasty following his defeat of Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth Field. Following his death of his aristocratic father, Henry VIII, who became king in 1509, maintained his father's policies to strengthen the crown. The near-total decimation of aristocratic opponents during the War of the Roses and an expanding economy which benefited the Tudor dynasty throughout the 16th century helped the king to restore royal authority. Henry created a small but efficient bureaucracy that made the king's intentions known throughout the land. Henry, however, believed that his sovereignty would not be manifest so long as England was under the religious leadership of the papacy. In 1534, he made a political, not religious decision when he broke from Rome and created the Church of England. Although the tenures on the throne were short and full of religious tension, Henry VIII's children, Edward VI and Mary Tudor, enjoyed the benefits of the restored prestige of the monarchy, which resulted from the efforts of Henry VII and Henry VIII. Now we're going to look at, go backwards because it's in order here. The greatest of all Tudors was Queen Elizabeth, or Elizabeth I, Henry VIII's daughter, from Anne Boleyn. Elizabeth was an intelligent woman who had been educated in the Italian humanist program of classical studies. She was a diligent worker and had excellent political instincts like her father. Also, like her father, Elizabeth knew how to select able ministers who would serve the crown with distinction. Men such as William Cecil, but she always kept herself as an ultimate decision-maker in the land. Elizabeth used the prospect of marriage as a diplomatic tool and allowed almost every single ruler in Europe to imagine what he could possibly marry her, a powerful way to build alliances whenever the need arose. Whether she truly was a virgin queen is a question that no one could even answer. She did seem to regard marriage as incompatible with her sovereignty, yet by staying single she exposed England to the risk of a religious war, because as long as she remained single, the Catholic Mary Stuart, the ruler of Scotland, was her legal heir. This is because Mary Stuart was Henry VIII's great niece, as her paternal grandmother, Margaret Tudor, was his sister. The relationship between England and Scotland was a complex affair that continued to plague both lands throughout the 16th and 17th centuries. For years, Mary lived as Elizabeth's prisoner, following a rebellion by Scottish nobles that forced her from the throne. Elizabeth retreated Mary as the rightful ruler of Scotland and the probable heir to the English crown, though she kept her under house arrest because she feared that Mary was plotting against her. Only after Mary conspired with Philip II of Spain did Elizabeth decide to settle relations with the Scots and to distance herself from Mary. In the Treaty of Berwick, 1586, she entered into a defensive alliance with Scotland. She recognized James, Mary's son, who was being raised as a Protestant, as the lawful king, gave him an English pension, and while she never specifically said so, let it be known that James was the heir to the throne. In 1587, Elizabeth finally took a step that she had been reluctant to take. She ordered the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots. In 1588, came the greatest moment in Elizabeth's reign, the defeat of Philip II's Spanish Armada, which ensured that England would remain Protestant and free from foreign dominance. Although at least part of Elizabeth's authority gradually eroded as she grew older and began to look beyond her reign in the future. The decades that followed the Armada conquest were also a period of incredible cultural flourishing. This was the age of Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, Ben Jonson, Edmund Spencer. And while Elizabeth may have not been a significant direct patron of the English Renaissance, the stability she provided England during her reign allowed it to take place. We'll stop the first video there.